Welcome back, students. In this video we're going to continue to talk about the Ming dynasty. We talked about how the first emperor of the Ming dynasty, the Hongwu emperor, had defeated the Mongols, had established the boundaries of, or secured the boundaries of the Chinese empire. After he died, his preferred successor was overthrown by his son, who established himself as the Yongle Emperor and reversed many of his father's policies. He established a new capital in the city of Beijing with a new palace known as the Forbidden City, built over 13 years by hundreds of thousands of workers. It's a remarkable work that you can see even today. This was at the center of the city. The Yongle Emperor also sent his great admiral Zheng He on a series of tributary missions of unprecedented size and scale. We discussed these missions when we looked at the history of Southeast Asia. They comprise about 2,000 ships, including treasure ships. There are 7 voyages. They wow, for want of a better word, most of India and East Africa and Southeast Asia. But later emperors are just going to halt these voyages, and so the Yongle Emperor shows an interest in expansion which isn't seen by the later emperors. So beginning with the Emperor Wanli, we start to see a certain siege mentality on the part of the Ming, or really kind of an inward turned kind of isolationist approach. We're told that the Emperor Wanli, that's W-A-N-L-I. He grew tired of the factionalism and the fighting in the court, and he simply stayed in the Forbidden City. And the Forbidden City starts to become a symbol of how the Ming emperors have just kind of retired from being involved in public life. And so it's, again, the bureaucrats and the court eunuchs who come to be the most powerful figures in government, and the emperors kind of marginalize themselves. And along with this kind of siege mentality that you see with the Forbidden City, with the continued building of the Great Wall, there's an economic crisis. So a shortage of silver occurs because of Portuguese and Spanish trade. So the Portuguese have first established trade with China in 1516. So here we tap into another of our course themes, the interaction of Asian societies with European outsiders. And by 1557, Portuguese and Spanish merchants were in the port of Macau and were exchanging silver for silk. So they would bring silver from the Americas and they would trade it for Chinese silk. In 1639, the Japanese adopt an isolationist policy that we talked about when we discussed the history of Japan. And so the Spanish begin cracking down on silver smuggling from America across the Pacific. So the Spanish need silver in Europe, and so they don't want to see Spanish merchants bringing silver to China anymore. And so silver in China starts to be in short supply. And this is really problematic for peasants who trade in copper coins but are expected to pay tax in silver. As silver becomes in shorter and shorter supply, each silver coin becomes worth more and more copper coins. So if you're a peasant, you have to work harder than you had had to work before in order to raise the silver coins you need in order to pay your taxes. And so you start to have a shortage of taxes, a shortage of tax revenue for the Ming dynasty. But at the same time, you start to see efforts to increase tax rates because of these shortages, and this further compounds the sort of spiral of being trapped that a lot of these Chinese peasants find themselves in. And so this shortage of revenue leads to a rebellion led by a Jurchen leader. So again, we're back to the Jurchen, another of the ethnic groups that we find in China. A Jurchen leader named Nuhachi in Manchuria. And he is able to unify the Manchurian tribes. Again, where is this political change coming from? It's coming from the northeast. And as early as 1618, he starts demanding tribute from the Ming, and he is going to defeat the Ming in 1638. And by this point, we have soldiers and peasants throughout Ming China who were rebelling against the Ming and frequently defeating the Chinese army. And so in 1644, a peasant rebellion from within China, so we have the Jurchen from Manchuria who are coming from outside China, but we also have a peasant rebellion from within China that captures the city of Beijing, led by the leader Li Xingcheng. And the last emperor of the Ming dynasty hangs himself on a tree outside the Forbidden City. Chaos follows, and 3 months later, the Manchus seize the capital. Although the Ming resist to the south in Nanjing, they were divided, and eventually, by 1662, they have all been defeated. The last Ming princes have died or surrendered, and the Ming dynasty has been replaced by a new dynasty, a Manchu dynasty. Again, a non-ethnic, a non-Chinese ethnic group from the northeast. Happens so often in Chinese history. And talk a little bit, the last topic that I'm going to cover in this video is the government of the Ming, which was considered to be exceptionally efficient and orderly among the dynasties of China. So the Ming are not considered a golden age of Chinese dynasty in the way the Han and the Tang were, but they were certainly considered to be efficient rulers. They took over the Yuan system of provinces, which remains the basis for the system of 13 provinces today. Remember, I said the great legacy of the Mongol conquest of China is the unification of China. The Ming, nevertheless, did not follow the 3 departments and 6 ministries system that had become pretty traditional at this point. Instead, they had one department, the Secretariat, which controlled 6 ministries. Ministries of personnel, revenue, rights, so offering worship to ancestors is still an important part of the role of the Chinese emperor and the Chinese government. Ministries of war, justice, and public works. And as had been typical under the Song and under the Yuan and now under the Ming, these ministries are staffed by scholar officials who come up through the system of examination in the Confucian classics that had been established by the Sui dynasty. And these exams were revised to be more difficult after 1487. The exams are graded blind, but those who were successful in these exams required many years of expensive training in order to be successful, in order to distinguish themselves. So typically about 10% of the population has access to this sort of training that can get them one of these jobs in government. It's one of the higher positions in society. Of those 10%, it's kind of a free shot. So it's a meritocracy, but it's a meritocracy based on a certain degree of wealth. Social and intellectual culture flourished during the period of the Ming rule, especially in the Yangtze Valley, which became seen as an economic heartland. Chinese authors had written short stories for a while, but it's during this period that we see the growth of Chinese literature and the development of the Chinese novel. The period of the Ming was also famous for ceramics and porcelain, especially this very distinctive blue and white porcelain that you can see here. This was exceptionally popular in Europe, and if you're a European merchant, you could become very wealthy by transporting this porcelain back to Europe from China. And that's partly a part of why porcelain is now known as China. You speak of plates and saucers and dishes and bowls, talk about them as China. That practice, that Western practice, originated during this period. The urban and rural lines of Ming China became increasingly blurred around the edges. So China has typically been a rural society up until this point, although we start to see that some periods of its history, trade is more important than others. But as during this period, the population continues to grow, and we start to find more and more people settling in cities. We also see sort of small family farms being established in the suburbs. So that's how Ming society is changing. The Ming are less interested in clockwork technology and mechanics. They see these as part of the corruption of Chinese culture by the Yuan. So this is part of the isolationism of the Ming and the Ming turning themselves or taking a more inward approach. This is a period of increased interaction with the rest of the world. It's not an increased interaction that is sought out by the Ming Dynasty, but it kind of finds them. And so we start to find Islam becoming more present in Chinese society, and the Ming are extremely suspicious of Islam and even of Buddhism. We start to see the rise of the Jesuit missionaries, who the Ming accept, the Jesuit missionaries led by Matteo Ricci, who the Ming accept because they're impressed by the accuracy of the calculations in astronomy that the Jesuit Christian missionaries are able to perform. But there's nevertheless a suspicion of these Christian missionaries as well. So this is where we're going to leave the Ming Dynasty, a dynasty that's successful in bringing political stability to China, but one that is increasingly suspicious of ideas and influences from the outside world.